Tensions are on the rise across the nation as Americans fear their rights to free speech are being trampled on by militant leftist organizations. One America's Pearson Sharp has more on how the National Guard could be mobilized to help protect our constitutional freedoms.
With radical left-wing groups like Antifa shutting down free speech at rallies across the country, some are calling for the National Guard to protect our civil liberties. And it's not without precedent. The White House has called on the Guard to quell riots and protect our rights, or even help in emergencies many times over the past few decades. They provide security for events or respond to natural disasters, like in 2005 when some 50,000 soldiers were activated to help after the devastation left by Hurricane Katrina. The National Guard is also frequently called to restore peace when violence breaks out, and there is a long history of soldiers being deployed to ensure our rights are upheld. During the 1950s and 60s, race riots threatened stability across several states as Americans protested against institutionalized racism and economic inequality. In 1957, troops from the 101st Airborne Division were sent into Little Rock, Arkansas, to maintain peace on orders from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The same thing happened a few years later at the University of Alabama, and President Kennedy responded by federalizing the state's National Guard. Then, in 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. and 3,000 other marchers were watched over by soldiers as they walked across Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. Soldiers were once again called into action after violence broke out in Detroit, with thousands of National Guardsmen deployed to bring an end to the deadly protests that killed 43 people. Over the years, and in cities around the country, local and state governments fell back on the National Guard time and time again to defend and protect the rights of citizens. And in 2014, Missouri Governor Jay Nixon ordered over 2,000 soldiers into the embattled city of Ferguson to put an end to the rioting and violence. But today, the National Guard could be called upon to protect Americans whose rights are threatened by militant groups. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe has condemned citizens for taking a stand to protect America's history and then refused to defend them from the violence committed by radical leftists in groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Both McAuliffe and the Charlottesville mayor tried to cancel the rally to support General Lee's statue, with a judge ruling their efforts to block protesters were simply because they didn't agree with their message. Police there were allegedly given the order not to interfere, allowing militant leftists to attack Americans who were exercising their constitutional rights. McAuliffe followed this up by issuing an order that violates the First Amendment, banning all demonstrations at the Lee Monument for 90 days. In the wake of the violence, neither the media nor local governments have been willing to denounce the leftist groups for their own hateful attacks. As a result, many are wondering if the time hasn't come once again for President Trump to call on the National Guard to ensure Americans have the right to exercise their freedom of speech. Pearson Sharp, One American News.